Good afternoon. This is Dr. Brent Turvey, and I am once again here with my friend and colleague, not Dr.
That has a nice ring to it.
It felt like it was going to get there, but I was thinking of Aurelio, and now my forensic investigator, Melanie Inglis, forensic investigator extraordinaire.
Extraordinaire.
Yeah, this is a very important podcast. I think they're all equally important on some level to some people, but this has more national and international reach and relevance than a lot of the stuff that we tend to do. And it's, I hate having to talk about this subject, but I think we need to. This week, we're going to talk about mass shootings and incel culture, and also the responsibility of law enforcement in these contexts, conditions, and investigations. And I will tell you right now, out of the gate, that I have investigated and testified in multiple mass shooting cases. Just because I get hired on a case doesn't mean I wind up testifying. Not every case I do an investigation. Not every case I do an analysis. Not every case I do a testimony. But I've been hired to examine a lot of these cases over the years, including I did some work on the James Holmes Theater shooting case in a civil context, and did some reconstruction and criminal profiling work on that. And I've done quite a number of probably 5 or 6, maybe as many as 7 family killings or mass shootings in a domestic context. And we're seeing more of these kinds of mass shooting cases. And there's a lot of confusion about it. Tell me about your, not I want to say background, but sort of your sort of where you draw your knowledge from when you come from these cases. I know you're a lot less experienced than me, obviously, but you have your own take and experience with these subjects. And I'm just curious, what are the spaces where you've encountered this formally? Because it's not everybody does.
But there's not many still, like not for me, as I'm still early in the career and in my journey. I'm honestly being introduced to a lot of it now. I would hear about it, of course. We would hear about it on the news and things like that. But in Canada, it's not that it doesn't happen. It's not publicized a lot when it does happen, and there's not a lot of education on it because it's more of a states thing, right? United States, it's happening all the time there. So this is a lot of it I'm still learning.
But there's a dimension to it that we talk about a lot, which is that despite the fact that this kind of crime doesn't happen a lot in Canada, there are a lot of men in Canada who have very strong opinions in these areas and in affected areas, right?
Men have a lot of strong opinions on everything.
Oh, shit. Oh, it's so soon. We're so early into the conversation. You're very right. Men, Aurelio likes to say to me sometimes, he goes, "Oh man, I wish I had your confidence." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You have all the confidence of a white man. You have all the confidence of a white American. You are so confident." And a lot of men have that belief, like whatever space they're in, whatever conversation is happening between whatever vulnerable groups or not, they believe theirs is the voice that needs to be heard.
That's right.
That's the basis of what? Mansplaining, right?
Absolutely. And talking about that kind of situation when the man is in a position of power, say, I'm not speaking about law enforcement right now, even in the school system, if they're high up in the school system. I just went through this. I had a long conversation with a principal at my eldest daughter's school, and I brought up the shootings because we were talking about these types of things. We were talking about race and divide and all of these situations. And I asked him what he did at his school in reference to the shootings that have occurred. Yeah. What he did to the 50% of the population of that school that is visible minority, what he did he talk about it? Did he ask if they feel safe? Did he want to educate them? And all he said was, "You're right, I did nothing."
Because, that's easier. It's easier to do nothing.
He said, it doesn't affect me. Okay. What? All right.
That's the line that I get from Riley all the time too. It's very important to recognize that when you say everything's fine, what you mean is everything's fine for you. And
right.
That's having actual empathy is. That's why the human rights perspective is so important, because it's not about you. If you're fine, okay. If there's a terrible thing happening on the planet, whether it's a mass shooting, starvation, racism, sexual exploitation, if there's something happening on the planet and you say, well, I'm fine, it doesn't affect me, that's called privilege.
That's right.
It's your privilege. You have a level of privilege that separates you from these terrible things that are going on. And there might be many layers, of privilege, or there might be just one, and you remove one, and all of a sudden you're right in the mix. And the inability to see that is the problem, I think.
People do not like that term. When you say privilege and people have no idea what it actually is, we've talked about this before, but because I used it recently with that principal, he was very offended. He thought I was saying something extremely negative to him, but well, but anyway, he got really offended with saying that I'm not privileged. Like, are you a white male?
Then yes, you are.
Then you are.
Because you're not getting sexually harassed. You're not having your pay lowered. You're not being expected to, in every context, to pretend like you're sexually available to keep a man from being upset with you. But the color of your skin does not prevent people from giving you bank loans or assistance, even the most basic courtesy. So yeah, you have privilege.
So and we all know that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, white men don't like it because they get angry at the notion that they're not there in the space that they're in because of their ability. They want to pretend that there's some natural gift or ability they have that makes them special. That's the belief that you don't have privilege is this very racist notion that comes from people who are trying to promote their identity as being special or independent or they did everything on their own. They didn't. You have
no. And you know what the number one response I get mostly from white men when we talk about privilege is I worked my ass off to get to where I am today.
That's probably true.
We're not talking about that.
Yeah, that's probably true. We all work our asses off. That's not the question. The question is, despite having worked their asses off, many people who do the same amount of work don't even get even a quarter of the pay.
That's right.
The hardest working person is not the person who gets the most privilege or the most rewards. It's the one who's white.
That's right.
So let's talk. So we've encountered this issue, and this issue is related to a lot of things. You cannot separate mass shootings from the reappropriation by radical extremists of the Second Amendment in the United States. You can't separate that from racism. You can't separate it from the Klan, and you can't separate it from religion. All these things are bound together, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to, I imagine, offend a lot of people, but this is what history does. This is the big issue is, historically, there's a whole movement right now to deny history, to get people to not read books, not look at history, and not examine what the United States was and how it became what it is and the relationship between people. We're going to talk about that, but let's first talk about mass shootings and what they are. There's two concepts here, mass shootings and mass killings. They are, in my mind, if you are separating those things out, then you are playing a little game. You're playing a little game to play with the numbers because you want to make it about a numbers game. The issue is what constitutes a mass shooting? Well, everybody has their own kind of definition, but it's usually either three or four or more people being shot at. And for example, in the Harvest Festival, there were quite a few victims, but there were also like almost 10 times more people that were actually injured. And the reason that people are surviving now, my good buddy Paul Cialino wrote a book about this, about the emergency trauma care system in the United States. And the guy who revolutionized it out of Chicago, I can't remember his name right now, but you can go look it up. Basically, we are way better at treating gunshot wounds now. The more that we've been through lots of wars, well, a lot of our surgeons have a lot of experience with gunshot wound victims. So a gunshot wound is no longer a death sentence in the United States. So this idea that if he didn't kill a certain number of people, then it's not as bad. Well, yeah, that's completely fake. That's completely false. If there's somebody shooting a lot of bullets at a bunch of targets, that's a mass shooting as far as I'm concerned. I don't care if anybody dies or not, because it's possible to save all those people as long as they don't get shot in the head or in a major artery or a major necessary organ. And even then, it's not necessarily a death sentence. So we are better now at saving people who have been shot, and that keeps the death count down. So the death toll being down is a red herring to the notion that we're getting less violent. That's another thing. Aurelia and I were looking this up. There's a constant state refrain in the United States. Oh, homicides are down. Violent crime is down. No, homicides are down, but the shooting deaths, the shootings themselves are up. People getting shot is up. It's the killing that's down, and that's because we have really good doctors in the United States who are saving lives and have a lot of experience with gunshot wounds. So this is the issue with me. I have this problem with using numbers of a death count or a shooting count. If you got a person firing into a group of people, that to me is a mass shooting. If they're firing into a target-rich environment. What say you on this, and how has this issue come up for you? Because I had come up with people trying to minimize the crimes themselves or pretend that somehow this is an exaggeration of what's going on.
I find that a lot of people, they do think that people have to die, right? So they think that it has to be a high number of people who have died during this shooting situation.
Yeah.
That's considered then a mass shooting to most people. I agree with you, where if you're shooting into a crowd of people or into a bunch of different people, like not necessarily a crowd, but in a store or something like that, and you're going around and you're shooting at a bunch of people, that absolutely constitutes a mass shooting, in my opinion.
Yeah. But I mean, have you found a resistance to that notion in the people that you talk to?
Okay, so there's a big difference between the people you talk to and the people here, because the people here don't believe that. They believe it because they see it, right? They believe it, they see it on the news, they hear about it, but they do not believe that it exists to a certain point, because the most resistance I get is, well, I'm so glad we'll never have to deal with that here.
Huh.
Now, there are, in the schools, they have implemented, you know how we used to have tornado drills and fire drills? Well, now we also have a lockdown drill in the school, which is new, right? That's something that didn't exist here for a very long time.
You're welcome.
Thanks. But there's an opportunity there to also explain to the students and educate and start to learn some history about mass shootings and things that are happening. And that's just, they don't. The kids are just like, why are we doing this? I don't understand. Who has the gun? Where is it coming from? There's no knowledge. There's no education. But the resistance here is people don't believe that it'll ever happen here, so it doesn't matter, basically.
Right.
It's just like, oh, that's unfortunate. People died, but what's going on tomorrow?
So there is no acknowledgement that it's actually a problem, or that
The only time there was an acknowledgement was that article that I sent to you. So after the shootings happened, the most recent shootings happened that were very public in the US, we had someone walk down a street near an elementary school in Toronto, and he was holding what looked like an assault rifle of some sort, and the police were called and they promptly killed him. Like that was the end of it for this person. Now, the articles I've seen after the fact was it was a pellet gun, or yep. I'm assuming that's what, not paintball. It was a pellet gun. So people were very frightened and all of a sudden really aware, and it was everywhere. Like people were sobbing and it was all over TikTok. If you don't think it can happen here, it was very dramatic. And then when they were like, oh, it was just a pellet gun, false alarm.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. So just to clear up what I said before, I looked it up because I wanted to make sure I was right about this. 61 deaths at the Harvest Festival in Las Vegas and 867 wounded. 411 of those people were wounded by gunfire. So, but a lot of the other people were trampled. That's the other thing, they trampled each other. But what I wanted to say is this was a moment for me in time that was very strange. Aurelio and I were actually in Las Vegas, and we had just done a profiling workshop. And a good friend of mine, his son runs is a concierge at the Mandalay Bay, and they offer. We were going to stay a couple extra days, and they offered us a room, and they gave us a room that was a suite on the edge of the hotel, and it was one floor below the shooter, one floor below him, and he checked in the day we checked out with all of his guns. And so when they were talking about the room, I actually knew the exact room because I had the same blueprint, the same carpet, the same hallways, the same everything, just one floor down. And we had been, ironically, Aurelio and I were talking about mass shootings because one had just happened. And he said, why isn't there a mass shooting in Vegas? And I said, it could never happen because everybody knows Vegas is a place for commerce. Vegas is a place where you don't come to shoot people. Vegas is a place where it's like Singapore. Everybody from all over the world comes to spend their money. And the police have everything locked down really good, and the security is really good, the reputation is very good, and blah, blah, blah. Turns out that all is smoke and mirrors. I fall into the same trap as everybody else. I watch the movies, and I think that the way that Hollywood depicts Vegas is the way that Vegas is in real life. In real life, Vegas has felons for people working security. People who have low jacks on their ankles are working in security with suits that don't fit them. That's how bad it is right now in Vegas. They have no idea. Their security might as well be non-existent. They're there to essentially ensure that money keeps flowing in and people who are causing a disturbance get removed. But the money comes in the form of not just gambling, but there are shit tons of gun shows there. So people are constantly bringing in firearms. And in the Harvest Festival shooting, they actually used the freight elevator to bring up. They did something like 27 loads in the freight elevator of all the guns he used. He used what did he have? He had an AR-15, obviously a 308 AR-10, 308 bolt action rifle, 38 caliber pistol, and he also had, and he was doing what was called parabolic sniping. He had calculated the distance, and you have to, the bullet doesn't actually work like it could go in a straight shot when you're firing at that great of a distance. So he's doing a parabolic examination of the trajectory so that he could do a calculation, fire into the air, and the bullets would fall on people. Then he was doing, and that's why they couldn't figure out where he was coming from, because he's not firing right at them, and the echoes that were all around. Anyway, the point is, he had planned it out very well, and everybody watched him do it, and nobody stopped him. And he was gambling. He was playing the slots and playing like $1,000 slot machines. It was a crazy situation, but it really pulled back the veil on what was possible and the capability of law enforcement to respond to this. And that brings us to the historical question. There have been enough mass shootings now that enough of the industries related, what we're talking about, hotels, schools, arenas, hospitals, any workplace in general, there is a notion that a mass shooting is possible. And law enforcement has all been receiving all this training about mass shooting that's supposed to immediately click in and engage when this goes on. And I'm not talking about, oh, they went to a seminar. No, we're pouring millions of dollars in. This is a big fundraising thing for law enforcement, not just in terms of the training that they get, but in terms of the equipment that they're getting. They're getting better equipment. They're getting better body armor. They're getting better the ballistic shielding. They're getting better training. They're getting better federal cooperation, better tactical gear. This all is because of these shootings that they're anticipating. And that, for me, was a moment in time when I realized, oh my God, we haven't learned anything. We have not only have we not learned anything, but the people that are responsible for responding, they don't know how to respond to this stuff. So that to me sets the stage for the law enforcement response. And what did we have in the last 3 weeks? We had we've had over the last month or so, we've had 3 major mass shootings and a bunch of smaller ones that are still terrible. Well, what I'm talking about, ones that are, over the 10 body count. And what we are seeing is not only just the terrible motivations behind some of these crimes, but the completely inept, completely negligent, completely horrifically, almost cowardly response from law enforcement in the live situation. Tell me what you were thinking about your perspective of law enforcement's ability to respond to these things before the events of the last month or so.
Well, before I saw what was actually occurring, I figured that they would do their job, go in, stop the shooter, try to do something at least. But as I'm seeing, they're as scared as everyone standing outside the buildings. They're not doing anything. They're just standing there and waiting for it to stop. I had this assumption that they were police officers. They would get ready. They would get on their gear and they would go in and stop the situation, stop the threat, right?
That's right.
But that's unfortunately not happening.
Not at all. And the other thing that we're seeing now more, and this is a great feature of a blowback from the Trump presidency, is we're seeing more racism as a motivation. People forget that it wasn't just about, we have the one in Buffalo that was obviously, this guy was very racist, and this guy had a very, very racist set of motivations. He targeted a black community, targeted a black neighborhood, but a place where black people went to go get groceries inside this obviously economically isolated food desert where there's no other places to go. He did that on purpose. But there are other ones that have happened as well, like in California at the Garlic Festival not too long ago. There was a guy who went there to shoot Hispanics. That's in the place where I used to live. I used to live in that area in a place called Watsonville, right down the road from the Garlic Festival. And that area is 95% Latino. 95%. Now, let me explain something. This is something really important for people to understand that I don't think they do in the United States, especially when we're talking about we're talking about Hispanics first. The Hispanic community They were here first. That is the important thing to remember. On the southern border states, they are not foreigners. They were here first. These were territories that were taken from Mexico by the United States in different contexts, right? But the Mexicans that live there, their families have been there way before there were white people. And that is something that in the United States, we don't seem to have a very good grasp of. We think it was always all white. The reason we think that is because everything we see in movies and television, starting from the earliest days, is depicting white people as the primary leader race, all right, in the United States, the European version of white people. All right, that's the first thing. Second thing is black people. The black people that are here, obviously, a lot of them came because of were basically kidnapped and sold into slavery. But the moment that the slaves got the right to vote is the moment when there was a swing back towards the Klan. The Klan had a resurgence. Why? Because you have all these black people who can vote. They now can impose their will on white people in the South because there are more of them. There are always more black people than white people in the South. Always. So what's the problem? The problem is the structural racism to prevent black people from voting. And they didn't do it by being mean to them and posting mean things on Facebook. They did it with organized lynchings, burning down churches, public executions, shootings, destroying businesses. This is what the Tulsa riots were about. This is what the Tulsa massacre rather was about. This is what every lynching is about. It's about a message to the black community to keep your place. And it's what Confederate war memorials were. Most people think Confederate war memorials were put there after the Civil War. No, they weren't. They were put there in response in the 50s and the 60s in response to the civil rights movement by the Daughters of the Confederacy, which is just another arm of the Klan. What I keep seeing over and over again is the influence of the Klan on these conversations and in these contexts. So this idea that that we are the white people were the first people here, the white people were the white people are the dominant race, that white people should have more power and privilege and authority and have more representation. It's a fantasy because I haven't even mentioned the third group. I'm so racist. I haven't even mentioned the third group, which is the indigenous population, because I always think of that as an afterthought. I'm a terrible person in that way. I just, because we have, as Aurelia reminds me all the time, they're a conquered people. We've put them on reservations and we're slowly destroying their culture with with government housing and government schools and that kind of stuff. So since banning, let's see, we go, Derek Griffith. Anyway, before we respond to Derek, let's respond to what I've just said, because I know I've said a lot, but it's to me, there's a history there that can't be denied, that has been being denied for a long time.
Yeah, I was going to make the point that when you just said about people believing that it was just white people, right? We were here first. In Canada, it's that's a battle between the white people and Indigenous, right? So if you talk to anyone here, they get very upset when you mention that it was their land first and we've taken everything away from them and we've put them in these places. Like we've done that to them, but nobody wants to acknowledge any of that. That's the conversation that's had here a lot. This is why the concept of critical race theory has made people so angry, because what they're thinking, you're going to be critical of my race. No, stupid person. Critical race theory means we look at how racial tensions and racial conflict has risen and fallen over time, and what effect that has had on society. For example, kidnapping and imprisoning and enslaving an entire culture of people. That's something that we need to talk about, because all the money and land that we all have as white people came because of the human misery that we exploited, whether it be Hispanics, black people, or indigenous people. Nothing that we have today was possible without that exploitation. And like we mentioned, everyone was very aware of the things that were happening when in Canada here, when they were finding all of the bodies in the residential schools. But nobody, it's such a difficult conversation, because nobody wants to understand that the education system is just pushing it out as much as they can. That research that brought a lot to the surface again, right? A lot of people kept it hid and we didn't talk about it a lot. Then it was resurfaced, and then all of a sudden, guess what? They're pushing it back out again, where they're not educating anybody on any of the history that happened here. The reason why, this is a very specific reason. The people who are in charge, who go into the school system, they sit on boards of education, they get involved
at the educational level, it's very often from a religious perspective.
Right.
They're motivated by religious reasons to be where they're at, because their public service is not about public service. It's about their need to push their religious or moral agenda on society, or their religious or moral beliefs. This becomes a very big problem when they have to reconcile the fact with the church's very deliberate, cozy, and exploitative relationship with the Klan. So anybody who's got any religion in whatsoever and has a religious history in their family, they don't want you looking back. Because if you look back, you're going to find the Klan, you're going to find lynchings, you're going to find hate crimes, you're going to find hate speech, you're going to find them excluding, especially Protestants. They go after, the Klan is essentially a Protestant organization against Jews, Hispanics, Catholics, all the people that the Protestants felt were inferior. And the same thing, and by the way, I was raised Protestant. And the Catholics do the same thing, back in the same way. They do the same stuff. Now, the modern day version of this is the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, which are just Second Amendment gun nuts with this racial purity idea in mind. And they don't even mean race. What they mean is class. They want a class of people. They want to rise above this. They think they're better than these other people. And this brings us straight to the incel question. I want to address Derek's question before we talk about incels, okay? So Derek Griffith asked, since banning bump stocks has it's made a significant impact on the mass shootings in America, has this made any difference at all? Okay, so what he's talking about is a bump stock is a thing that you put on a firearm that allows you to turn it from a semi-automatic, which shoots one shot, to something that will let 3 shots fly at once. A lot of guns have this feature on it where you can go from semi-automatic, 1 shot at a time, boom, 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 or you can switch it to a 3-round burst, the military version of that. Bump stock is one way of ensuring that you can that it pulls the trigger back only so far, and you get that 3-round burst really fast. It's designed. Basically, all it does is it turns a semi-automatic weapon into not a fully automatic weapon, but close enough. Now, here's the thing. You can do the same effect by taping pennies behind the trigger. That's not that difficult to convert any firearm into a semi-automatic one if you heat up the loads by putting more powder in it and then just tape some pennies behind the trigger. Not difficult. I was learning this stuff when I was a teenager. That was just cool stuff you could do. But let's talk about specifically banning the bump stock, which was not a bad idea. The problem is that's closing the barn door after the horses have escaped. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're done. The bump stocks have already. So when you ban something, I had this conversation with my buddy Paul Cialino. He and I both have collected firearms our whole lives. He's got way more than me, but I have a lot. But he said to me, he goes, "You got to be careful with this. This is all this gun control stuff. It's a slippery slope. It's very slippery." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Well, because those left wing nut jobs, they'll come for your guns." And I said, Paul, that's never been true. The left has never come for guns. They might ban certain things, but the guns that have been made, and they're making millions of firearms a year in the US and Eastern Europe, they are already being sold. They already exist inside of the country. The same is true with bump stocks and extended magazines. I'll give you a very basic economics lesson here, how it works. The biggest friend that the NRA ever has, is a left-wing or a left-leaning or a Democratic president, because they're going to ban stuff. Why is this good? Because what happens when you ban something? You don't ban it today. You say, okay, the ban is going to take effect in 2023. So that means between now and 2023, they're going to make a bunch of this stuff and they're going to sell it. And every single loser gun nut that's out there is going to buy up this shit at the semi-inflated price, hoping that they can resell it at triple the price to other people after they've been banned. And now it's in private sale domain. Okay. And they'll sell it at gun shows for a huge profit. But guess what happens? The ban always expires and then they get to make more. Mm-hmm. So the bans don't mean anything but profit. Bans are about ensuring profit for the gun companies. If you want to make money with guns, this is how you do it. You do it with bans.
Let's bring Canada in for 1 second here on this situation that just happened that I was talking to you about, because I know a lot of people are talking about Trudeau's response to the shootings that happened in the US, and he's put an immediate freeze on handgun ownership in Canada.
Not you mean like they're going to go take guns out of people's homes? That's what they're going to do?
No, it stated that they were going to, you can no longer get a license to own a handgun.
Sure.
And the people who do own handguns, they are talking about the possibility of making it very difficult for them to actually keep this gun in their possession. There's no transportation of it. So now, like taking your handgun to go to the gun range or anything, like there's an immediate freeze on everything. Then we had no, it wasn't the RCMP. It was the Ontario Chiefs of Police. They came and released a statement and said, it was actually quite funny. He just said, this isn't going to stop anything. This is going to actually make it worse. And he said, I don't know what Trudeau thinks, but most of the people that own guns, a large majority of the people that own guns are criminals, and they're not getting their license for said guns. Yep. So none of this is going to stop anything from happening. It's not going to make it any better. It's just going to make it worse.
Yeah. Most of the time when a criminal gets a gun, they're getting it because they stole it. They stole it from they stole it from a car, or they stole it from a place of business. And if teachers get guns in the classroom, those guns are going to get stolen too. That's what's right.
So freezing the people who have the license to have this, it's not going to do anything.
No, I don't. I think that gun control laws are good. Like we don't. Well, let me give you an example. My father-in-law, he bought a shit ton of high-capacity magazines when they banned them back in the day under Clinton. They banned him, and they banned assault weapons and a bunch of stuff. He bought a ton of them thinking he was going to resell them. You know what happened? The market bottomed out. Basically, they become worthless because everybody had bought so many that everybody had ton. All the people who you would sell to, they did the same thing. They all went and bought a bunch of shit. Most of the people who collect guns, they don't have a couple of guns. They have hundreds of guns.
Right.
Dozens or hundreds. I have dozens. A lot of people have hundreds, but they collect it because they enjoy it. They collect it because because they're doing some resale or whatever. But there's the other ones that collect it because they believe they're in a one-man militia and that they're going to be ready for it. And those are the dangerous ones. Every one of us who is a responsible gun owner knows people who own guns who shouldn't have them. And if you're a responsible gun owner, you want gun control laws. Anybody who's saying, "Oh, I don't want gun control laws," that's because you, motherfucker, would be excluded from buying one if these mental health evaluations were in place, or if background checks were in place.
And I want to state something here, because a lot of the response that I've heard from people is they feel safer here in Canada because it's much harder in their perspective. Yeah. It is much harder to get a license and to buy a gun.
Yeah.
But I have been through the licensing. I've done my restricted and unrestricted licensing. I did all of the courses. I have a handgun, all of those things. Yep. I just want to a little bit of reality for those people who think that it's harder to get the gun here. You have to give references, right? When you're presenting for your license for your gun. I had a police officer. I had everyone that I could find as a reference. I had 3 or 4. Not one of them were called.
Yeah.
Nobody was called.
No, the desire of the gun shop owner or the gun seller is to get the gun in your hand because they believe everyone should have one.
But this is the RCMP. So you have to do this through the RCMP. So you're getting it from them, sending it back. They're not even calling your references. And they just literally sent me my license in the mail. And I contacted my references and I said, did they call? And they were like, no. And I said, well, I have my license. And that was very concerning to the officer that was one of my references. But everyone I know that has a gun, none of the references have been called at all. It's money. It's about getting you in, do the licensing. It's like $400 or something for the weekend. It's about money. And then you go and spend money buying a gun. And then you have to get the gun case and the locks. It's all about money. They don't give a shit.
If you got a white person selling guns through a gun shop, especially in southern states or in a state like Alaska, that person can avoid filing the correct paperwork, doing background checks for generations. There was one gun shop that finally got shut down. I think it was I can't remember if it was Anchorage or Juneau. I think it was Juneau because they weren't doing their DEA paperwork and they hadn't been doing it for 20 years. They've been getting threats for 20 years to do it. And they finally got shut down for not doing it because people complained. But the idea of everyone having a gun is the fantasy of the gun owner, and it's what they make profit off of. And the government when you're talking about the RCMP, you're talking about law enforcement. Too often the people that are involved in those things, they have the same view, the same lunacy view. If you're a real cop, you want good gun control because you don't want to be up against legally purchased firearms that outmatch you.
That's right.
So that's just one thing. But the other thing is criminals, right? Criminals having guns. Criminals having guns is, at least it makes it illegal and it gives an avenue for an arrest. For example, we have Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse is the kid who went to Wisconsin to go to the Black Lives Matters movement because he wanted to shoot black people, but he couldn't legally buy or own a firearm in his state. So he had his friend's father made a straw man purchase in Michigan and kept the gun for him there. So when he crossed state lines, he didn't violate any laws. He got the gun there and used it there. This is essentially no different than any other mass shooting, because you have a group of unarmed people trying to stop this guy from killing them, who was pointing their gun at them, and he starts shooting because he gets frightened.
He was scared.
He was so scared because these unarmed people were these unarmed black people that he'd gone out to attack, that he stated he wanted to go kill, frightened him. No, this is fiction. And so the idea that we create laws to make it more difficult, but somebody who wants a gun can find a way around it because there are so many guns already in the environment. And this goes right to the question of whether or not gun control laws can even be meaningful. If you're fighting to enact gun control laws, that's good, but it's not going to solve the problem of the guns that are already out there. That's the first thing. So acknowledge that, right? The guns and the ammunition are already out there.
Yeah.
What you're going to do is make it hard. So why are people fighting so hard for gun control when they know it's not going to be, or fighting so hard against it when it doesn't stop the people from owning the guns they already have? Because of the money. The NRA pays something like, they donate in Congress alone, they donate something like $220 million a year to congressional members to keep them on their side in these issues, because they make a huge amount of money annually off of gun sales and memberships. Mm-hmm. The NRA is has a very big vested interest in gun brokering that comes from Eastern Europe. So that's to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you're just trying to protect future sales, because everybody who wants a gun right now has one. And even if you put gun control things into space, the people who own guns, they own so many of them, it's not even funny. So no one's going to get their guns taken away. There's already a lot of guns and ammunition out there, and gun control laws will not take back the guns that are already out there. The only reason to fight against gun control laws at this point is because you want to see more guns getting sold into an economic system that already has them, a ton of them, to satisfy what we call the amosexual need to have guns and firearms. Not heterosexual, not bisexual, amosexual. They get aroused by guns. And that's the other issue I want to cover. So I want to have a very honest conversation with you about, and you shoot your gun. How often do you shoot your gun? How often? Not
at all right now. Haven't in a while.
Exactly. Well, you're busy. You've been locked down, right? So
essentially
perpetual lockdown.
For 2 years, yes.
Worst, right? But it's the way it goes. So for me, when I lived in Alaska full time, I would be shooting probably once a week, once every month at least, I would say. Now, there we go. Really, I was tipping the hand of where we're going, which is the incel problem. Where does this come from? What's the good part about shooting a gun for recreation, owning a gun and shooting it for recreation? What do you enjoy about that? I mean, the self-defense part, you don't need to explain that. If you feel like you need a gun for self-defense in your home, I don't have a problem with that. But what about the part about shooting a gun? What is enjoyable about it?
What is enjoyable about shooting a gun?
Yeah.
Feeling of power.
All right. So this is a really good, important conversation. I love shooting my guns. I got shotguns, pistols, rifles. For my son's graduation, I got him a really nice AK-47. I mean, and in Alaska, you go to an island, you go somewhere safe away from people, and you shoot and you put up targets, and that's what you do. If you're going to go hunting, you use a single shot bolt action Remington, something like a featherweight or something like a 227 or something like that. Something that is not dangerous to be around other people with. But if you're going to go shoot for fun, you want something that has a lot of kick and a lot of blast and whatever, because that's fun. But it's fun because it feels good. It feels good because it makes you feel powerful. If this is the only place in your life where you feel good and powerful, you do not want that taken from you. No. For me, I can take it or leave it. I enjoy shooting, but it's not a requirement for my personality. And I certainly don't need to post pictures about it on Facebook or social media because that's not my identity. I do enjoy shooting, but I understand the difference between hunting shooting for personal pleasure, just shooting targets, and self-defense. There are 3 different reasons to own a gun, and not all they're all equally legitimate as far as I'm concerned. But if it is your only source of personal sense of power and ability and authority and masculinity, then that's a problem. And this is the issue. We need gun control laws. I totally believe that, because any reasonable, responsible gun owner wants the crazy people not to have them, or people that are criminal not to have them. So let's plug that hole. We do not need, assault weapons in being sold to the regular population. That's what's accounting for the body count in these cases, in these mass shooting cases. It's not about the fact that they had a gun. It's the kind of gun they have, the high capacity magazines, the AR-15, which can shoot a lot of rounds in a very short period of time, and the amount of damage that you can inflict. They can do that in seconds before there can even be a response. Whereas with other guns, it's less likely they can inflict that amount of damage. But if this is the only place that you are getting any sort of sense of power and masculinity and sense of identity, that becomes the problem. That's when it becomes a fetish. And you can see it when you got somebody who looks like they're about 80 pounds overweight, wearing like a vest and a helmet cam, and they got their glasses on, their tactical shooting glasses on, and their machine gun. They look like they're in a cosplay. They look like an overweight stormtrooper. That's what a lot look like. And it's comical. But that is the identity they're trying to preserve. It's so important to them. What is the relationship between this and mass shootings? Well, we have met these people in what we call the incels. Incels are involuntarily celibate people who believe that their identity has been defined by a lack of sexual experience with women, that they believe they've been raised on stories and mythology and cultural attitudes and beliefs that say, if you work hard and you're a white man, then you are entitled to sexual, and you're successful in some way, whatever, you are entitled to sexual access to a female for the fairy tale ending. The fairy tale ending for the female is the big wedding and lots of children and a nice house and whatever, and not having to work, I guess. I don't know. That's the myth that's being sold. But It's also, but for men, it's you now are the head of the household, and you have sexual access to this woman, and you have complete command over their body, their life, and their children. It's all you. When they don't get this, they believe it is because they blame a particular type of male for it. They blame a particular type of attitude and belief for it, and they hate women for it. They think women are choosing other men over them. They believe that they are being forced into celibacy by their lower position in society. And if your only power then comes from the end of a gun, this is when these guys get together and talk. They basically vent their spleen, and they ramp themselves up into a little violent frenzy, which either implodes on themselves in terms of suicide, or explodes into the world in terms of gun violence. Was this the first time when we talked about it in the program the other week? Was this the first time you'd encountered this idea, or tell me about your experience with this notion, this ideology?
Incel?
Mm-hmm.
So I had become aware of it, like more like the more knowledge I have now is from the schooling and from learning from you in education through this topic. But there was a situation that happened here. I think it was in 2018, when a man drove a vehicle onto a sidewalk and killed a bunch of people.
Yeah. Now,
he referred to an incel group at that point. He said he was part of an incel. He had posted it publicly, and the response, I didn't know what it was. I had no idea at that point. I was just like, what does that mean? So I looked it up, and the response in Canada from their experts is that this did not exist. It's nothing to worry about. He was just identifying with some other virgins. So he felt better about himself, and that it's just a group of men that need a lot of mental health. And then I never heard about it again until we started talking about it in the courses.
And the thing is, a lot of these shooters identify with that incel community. A lot of them do. They have the same anxiety, the same anger towards women. They believe that they should have sexual access to them. They believe that they are up against this class of males and this class of females. They're excluding them from the big party. Well, let me back up just a second and say, this is why I think gun control is important, but I also think there has to be a change in the way we view ourselves and in the way we view guns and violence. Mm-hmm. We are raised in an action hero culture. where the gunslinger fantasy is very potent, and it's in the minds of all American men. American men see their masculinity as tied almost directly to firearms and violence in many areas of the country. Not all of them, but many. Sufficient enough that men will. It's the classic the Tinder conundrum, where when a woman is looking at men on Tinder, what are they doing? If they see a red flag, will be a man with a fish, a man with a gun, or a man. What are the other red flags? And they're looking for the pictures that men like to post.
That's what I was going to say. The guy that's holding the fish. That's like the number one no.
Look what I killed! I killed this thing. It's dead.
No to the fish, guys. Stop with the pictures with the fish.
Or with the guns, right?
Or
Look
with the guns.
Gun. My gun. I got a gun. You want to come
No
over?
No.
Did I mention I have a gun? Want to touch it? That's exactly the problem, right? We are raising people to believe that they are somehow in an action movie where they need to be armed to the teeth to deal with their fellow human beings.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first part of the problem. So our ideological beliefs have attached masculinity with violence. More masculinity, more violence, and the more violence you are able to inflict, and the more harm you're able to inflict, the more masculine you are. That's why we like big guns with high capacity magazines. It's men with big cars, right? It's the same thing, right? Just up there flopping around.
Just flopping around on top.
It's compensatory.
Let that go, eh?
I'm never going to let it go. It cut me so deep. I'm still getting over it. In fact, I'm not sure. I will need to talk about it later.
You identified way too much.
I know. It was because you imagine, you always think about yourself. Have I done that? Oh God.
Oh my God. Am I that guy?
Oh my God. I have been that person. All right. So, so that's first part. First stage one is this issue of identifying masculinity with violence. That's the first thing. But the second thing is the thing that has really converged to make it worse is social media. Because on social media, you have people who are trying to sell themselves as a brand or as an influencer or whatever by showing the most exaggerated version of their lives, either as a female with, lots of makeup, lots of that's not fair. Makeup isn't the problem. It's not makeup. It's not clothing. It's the way they present themselves as a product. They present themselves as a product using certain things, and that tend to involve certain types of clothes and certain types of certain makeup and certain body modifications, none of which are by themselves bad, but it's when you put it all together as a package that you're trying to sell to people as an image, that's when it becomes problematic because it creates a false expectation of reality for anybody watching.
Oh, and on top of all of that for the females, then they put a filter over it as well. Yeah.
The filters.
The ability to catfish someone.
Yeah, it's so great.
And also coming from an organization that looks for missing people.
Yeah, it's difficult.
If you were to give us one of your current pictures and you had went missing, if you had none of that on because you don't wear a filter and you weren't all done up like in your pictures, you'd walk right by people.
Yeah, we find ways to exaggerate our positive features and put them on social media, whether that's our lifestyle, our wealth, our possessions, our materialistic manifestations of materialism, or the way we look. We find ways to promote the most exaggerated version of ourselves, to sell ourselves on social media, that our lives are excellent, that our looks are excellent, that our experiences are amazing, and that kind of stuff. That's the image that's being sold, whether you're on the lower level of that or on the extreme wannabe influencer end of it. All right, the Kim Kardashian wannabes and Kim Kardashian herself, that kind of image. Mm-hmm. There are so many people who are influenced by the Kardashians. It's not even funny. They want to live and be that lifestyle. That is what these incel guys are seeing on social media as what women are. That's what they think women are. They think women are that, right? It's not a problem. They can say, oh, it's about they're watching too much porn. Well, they're watching porn because they're not having sex. So that's their entry into trying to figure out what sex is because they don't have a partner. Yep. The porn isn't the problem. The problem is the way that we treat and regard sex and our sexual identity and the way we sell it and market it in social media in a very negative and unhealthy way that creates a false belief about what women are. And the same is true with men. We do the same thing. We create a false image of ourselves online that makes us look better, seem smarter, look more powerful. And we often do it using the mechanisms of violence. All right. So now we have these two false versions of males and females on social media competing for our time, competing for our attention, that become the definition of being male and female to these incels that have none of these traits or characteristics. Mm-hmm. And they think that they're being excluded from this party that's going on between these people that don't actually exist. That's the thing. They've bought the lie. They have bought into the lie. They've drank the Kool-Aid. Let's see. So it's a terrorism threat. This is really important to understand. Thanks, Ariel, for reminding me of this, because this is the language that we need to start using. The people who commit mass shootings are domestic terrorists. They are trying to because their targeting tells you who they're trying to terrorize, whether it's the people in a particular workspace, people in a particular community, or the people, or many mass shootings are actually femicides in disguise, where they've decided that they're going to go kill somebody. There was a mass shooting recently at a church where a young man killed two women, and one of them, it was a relationship problem. They haven't exactly pulled it all out, but that is very often the motive beneath a mass shooting. Somebody who's an incel believes they should have had access to a female for some reason, whether they were in a relationship or not actually in a relationship at all, and they express their disappointment, anger, and frustration in a violent fashion by killing the female first, or killing the male that they're in competition with, and then the female. So that gets mixed into the mass. Then they kill everybody else that's around them because they're so angry. I like this. This is very good. The rough criteria to define terrorist group. One, they use violence in the name of a political, religious, or ideological cause. That's the incels. They got the knife attacks, and the incels do not hide their motives at all. I have found that they are very quick. They're the ones who write manifestos. They're the one who prepare videos. They're the ones who tell everybody in their life, yeah, I'm going to do this, and it's because of this. They don't hide their incel nature or culture or motivations at all, either before or after the crime if they survive. They aren't committed, but another thing that it makes it a terrorist thing, it's not by the government. It's committed by young men. These are young, angry men who are disenfranchised from society because of what they're seeing in social media or what they're seeing in the world around them. And their violence is they might be aimed at a person, but really they generalize it to a whole population, whether it's Black people or in the case of the incel, the women or the men, the women they consider to be the model of women that they are entitled to, or the man who they consider to be more masculine and therefore a bigger competition to them. To them, it's a problem. So they don't have the social skills to actually engage in a relationship. They don't have the desire for actual intimacy, and they're feeding themselves on this constant diet of social media that reinforces their belief that they're actually not going to ever have access to this fantasy female that doesn't exist because of this fantasy male that doesn't exist. Respond to me, because that's interesting to me. It's such an interesting conundrum.
I actually have a question, and I want your opinion on it. I was reading an article this morning, actually, on incels and people who are doing the research on this, and I want your opinion on what you think is going to happen. There was a theory that there was less of this violence happening specifically with incels during the lockdowns. Now they're speculating that there was a sense of belonging because everybody was online, more people were accessible, they were talking to more people because you use different images or whatever. You can get attention from women when they were online.
Yeah.
And they're predicting that there's going to be a massive increase in the violence from this particular group once all the mandates and things like that have been lifted and everyone is off of the online, off the online world. And then they're triggered again, going back into this like loneliness and this desire that they have. And they think there's going to be more violence because of it. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, it's undeniable that there were far fewer mass shootings during the lockdowns because of the fact that there were fewer people gathering in large places. Right. That's undeniable. So naturally, when somebody doesn't have the ability to go into a public space and shoot a lot of people, that's going to be difficult. What did grow up, and this is really important, what did increase was domestic violence incidents, sexual abuse, all manner of physical violence. All that increased during the lockdown. So one kind of violence went down, another kind of violence went up. Violence in the home went through the roof. was
Do you
very
think
bad.
this, and domestic violence did, and a lot of domestic homicides, all of those things went up, child abuse, sexual abuse, things like that.
Yeah.
But with this particular group of people or men, and let's look at it from a psychology standpoint, when they're feeling, we understand that people aren't congregating in areas and there's less opportunity to go and do that. But do you think that took any of that away for a moment? Like they felt like they were included, that they were getting these women, even though it's all false. It's
I think
not.
I think it got worse. Let me tell you what happened. It's like a spring. It got worse. So it's a spring. You push down the spring super hard, it's going to snap back when things get back to everybody being out in public, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
The reason why is because their space, which was normally their space, and theirs alone, their space got invaded by the people that they hate the most.
Yeah.
And taken over. So I would argue that rather than clumping together, there's the normal spaces where they could go and find refuge. They probably didn't have the same level of refuge. They were getting invaded by people that they consider to be enemies to their situation or the causes of their situation. So that forced them into different spaces where they became more radicalized.
Right.
There is a corollary, though, and that is I want to know. I think we don't know exactly what the impact of the lockdown is yet until we see all the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of things that increased during that time. A lot of things that changed and increased. And what we're seeing now is a response to that. We're seeing a response to that being locked down and that being coiled up and that damage, because now they're free to go and do what they want.
Yep.
That's what I think. I think it's too simplistic to say, oh, that preserved us. No, that preserved everybody and kept everybody from each other except for people in their home, for which there was a living nightmare. I think once we get out of full lockdown and people start telling their stories, we're going to start seeing films and TV shows being made about the horrors of the lockdown and the abuse they suffered and the violence they suffered in different ways and the sacrifices that they had to make to survive. I mean, you got people who were, going through divorces who got stuck in lockdown together, or people in domestic violence situations, or as we said, sexual abuse situations, stuck in lockdown now full time with their abuser. It was not a good scenario for a lot of people. For the incels, their space got invaded. So I think we're now seeing the coil exploding back because you push down too hard, the pressure's got to be relieved, and now it's happening. So before we end today, I want to recover the shooting that happened in Uvalde. That was that shooting. The first of all, the one that happened at the Top store in Buffalo, that was devastating. I mean, the person just went around and was just shooting everybody indiscriminately, except for the white guy.
For the white guy.
People, and he put the camera on his head, and he shot everyone without even just kind of talked to himself and got it all ready to go, and then just did it.
He also apologized. Don't forget, he apologized for pointing the gun at the white guy.
That's right. He apologized to the white guy. He was there for the black people. He made it very clear.
Yeah.
The other thing is that his motivation, while not being hidden, it was horrific because he's telegraphing. He's like, yes, we love this video game style, and this is the live Twitch stuff that's going on that's really good. I can see a day where people are emulating this, and they have little scorecard going on, a little point counter going on.
Yep.
So many points for this victim, so many points for that. I can see that occurring.
Yep.
That's a very big problem for me. That's the first thing. But let's now talk about Uvalde, where the guy was on an online relationship with somebody he was basically an incel who was living with his grandma because he had his own problems, and they were not paying attention to what he was doing. And he made all these violent threats online and wasn't hidden at all. Basically, he walked a straight line into that school after he crashed his vehicle, walked a straight line in there, and nobody stopped him. Not one person. We have this, it comes back to what I saw in Harvest Fest and the one in Florida, the mass shooting in Parkland, where the police hid rather than do their job. The police hid. And in this case, in Uvalde, they spent more than almost 80 minutes preventing parents from going in to go help their kids because they were so busy arresting the parents. They went inside, they got shot at, and they got frightened, and they left. And every time you interview one of these cops or one of these people, they're saying the same thing. Oh, well, we were getting shot at. We can't do that, except for they have all the training They have all the guns. They have all the ballistic shielding. They have all the authority to do, and their mandate is to do that. So for me, it really pulled back the veil completely on law enforcement's actual duty of care and responsibility in these cases. They have no duty of care to protect life, citizenry, or property. That's only inside of their policies and procedures. There's no constitutional duty there. So we give them all this training, we give them all this authority, we give them all these weapons, and we give them all this leeway, and they do nothing with it because they do nothing that we want with it. If this guy was black, maybe they would have killed him, I guess. Maybe they would have killed him sooner. Or if they were tasing parents and zip tying them on the ground, they were restraining parents, handcuffing them. If the guy had been unarmed, that maybe they'd have a better ability to respond. But since the guy was armed, they were afraid. And that to me is the greatest revelation. The other revelation is they're shutting everything down and they're not talking. One of the things that came out in this case is that the feds actually were the ones who finally said, enough, we're going in. And the guy on the ground who was giving the orders, they were defying his orders by going in. If he had his way, there'd be more dead because they'd given up on this. They basically thought, oh, the kids are all dead, so it doesn't matter. They weren't thinking kids were shot and bleeding. They weren't paying attention to the kids who were calling on 911, begging them to come in and help them. To me, it was horrifying. But the explanation, we just learned yesterday, the guy who's the acting chief of police, he basically said, yeah, I didn't have my radio on me, but even if I did, I would turn it off because I don't listen to stuff. I'm too busy making moves. I'm too busy doing stuff to be distracted by the radio. And then they said, well, but you're in charge. You were in charge. How do you make decisions if you don't have information? And he said, well, I'm only learning just now that I was in charge. That's his excuse now. His raising excuse is he's only learning now that he was the one in charge at the time. The problem is all the protocols and practices and the training that they give that he should have read, which I'm pretty sure he didn't, and pretended. I'm guessing he faked his training on that, like a lot of cops do. They fake their certifications. What they do is they say they attend and somebody else signs them in or whatever. I don't know. And they take the money or they take the day and go fishing. I don't know what they do. That happens a lot.
Their pictures.
Whatever he did, whatever training existed, he either didn't get it or he ignored it. So either he basically said, I didn't know I was in charge. No, it's in the thing. You're the guy in charge. You're the shot caller. There's no one else. And that's why everybody was listening to him at the scene when he was telling them not to go in, even though kids were screaming and dying.
Can you explain to me why, when you are being called as an officer to that situation, an active shooter in a school, can you explain to me why you're waiting for someone to tell you to go in? Shouldn't you just be getting there and going in? The
protocol says two things. One, if you're the first responder and it's just you need to be prepared to go in alone, because the only way to stop lives from being lost is to take out the shooter. That is the first priority. And if you're law enforcement, that's your first job. Take out the shooter, no matter what. The second thing is, this is the movie fiction that gets sold to cops that they believe is that the first rule of law enforcement this comes from The Untouchables from Sean Connery. The first rule of law enforcement, you come home alive. No, moron. That's not your first rule. That's not your first job. Your first job is to make sure everybody else comes home alive.
Aren't you supposed to sacrifice your life for everyone else?
That's what it says in the protocols. Every single active shooter protocol says you must be willing to exchange your life for the life of the people that you're saving. And if you're not willing to do that, then you are not to be in this profession. You need to choose another profession.
And how many officers would you estimate were standing around that school that day?
We don't have to estimate. We know. It was in excess of 19. 19 inside and then some people outside. It was hundreds of law enforcement officers on scene, standing outside, taking selfies and drinking water.
And it didn't register that 19 of them could take out one person and save a bunch of kids? No?
One of them could take out the guy and save a bunch of kids.
Well, I know that, but they clearly don't.
Well, they did. That was the thing. They did know that, but they didn't want to do it. They understood that they could take the guy out, but that somebody might be hurt in the process, and they'd rather not do that.
Oh.
So this idea of the hero cop, gone. Any notion that these are people that are heroes that should be exalted all the time, whatever, no, they're not. And not only that, one of the things you compare this with is the very honest the very honest testimony of one of the Capitol police officers last night in the January 6th hearings that are being held in Congress. She said, I'm in law enforcement. I'm not trained for this. I'm not trained for this kind of brutal combat. I'm not trained for this kind of riot control. We don't do this. This was a war. This was an armed force coming at us. And that is the thing that needs to be acknowledged. Law enforcement does not have the capability, the training, or even the character to go up against guys like this. Not in general. There are specific, very specific tactical groups that are, but they had those in Uvalde. They had a tactical response team, and they didn't want to do it. They had police officers who had training that understood they were supposed to do it even without the tactical part of it. They didn't want to do it. The only people who were motivated enough to go in was the parents. Now, this is the very interesting part here, the final part I want to touch on. And Aurelio has rightly put this up here. I don't think that enough people understand the connection between law enforcement and white supremacy, or what's now called white nationalism. And by the way, police officers are not black, they're not white, they're not Hispanic. They are blue. All cops are blue. You're into the culture, and you're into that culture to protect that culture. You're into that ideology to protect that ideology. So you can say, well, he can't be, he's black, or he can't be, he's Hispanic. One of the most racist things I've ever seen happen to Aurelio happened by a Mexican national who worked as security in TSA. When all the white people were acting, okay, we're not going to do anything with this Mexican who's coming across the border. The Mexican guy wanted to prove that he wasn't a racist, or that he wasn't a sympathizer. So he did the most racist search of Aurelio and the most racist detention of him ever. So the idea that the people who are of color or people who are minorities, that they can't be racist, that needs to go away now. And they can certainly join nationalist movements and groups in order to create a new identity for themselves where they don't see themselves being attacked in that way. But let's talk about the history of law enforcement very quickly. Law enforcement came as a result of the slave patrols. When slavery was legal in the United States, or slavery was legal in the colonies and then the United States, the slave patrols were generated to retrieve slaves that escaped. These groups of people that went out and retrieved black people who were trying to get away and get their freedom, they eventually became the Klan. The Klan started as a joke. It started as making fun of itself, just like incels. But then it got taken seriously because basically black people, once they got the vote, now we have to control them. We have to control them from the consequences of our exploitation, violence, slavery, rape of them for generations. So white people needed to have firearms to protect themselves against black people. They were afraid we're going to exact some vengeance. Fortunately, that didn't happen very often. That was not a thing that white people really had to be afraid of, because the people that they were dealing with were not violent people. That's the thing that is so ironic to me, is that if women as a group, black people as a group, or Hispanic people as a group decided they were going to come up with a violent solution for stuff, white people would be in no position to fight back. We would be wiped out overnight. But they don't, because a lot of them are Christians, a lot of them are nonviolent, a lot of them are pacifists, a lot of them have good families. They don't want to invoke a violent solution. It's white people that have always done that. White people have exclusively been, well, not exclusively, but 90% of the time, they're the ones who are starting the violence and doing terrible things because they're afraid of the consequences of their bad behavior from a group that outnumbers them, whether those consequences come in the form of physical violence or in the form of voting. So that's why the South has always had a problem with voter suppression. They always want to suppress the vote, keep the numbers low, keep the population controlled, and keep them frightened. That's what the point of the Klan was to terrorize black people. And that included the formation of Confederate war memorials on the courthouse lawn in every county in the South. Why? Because when black people came to the courthouse, they knew this place is owned by the Klan. You're not going to get justice here. You're going to get what you deserve in our cultural view. So the Second Amendment, the protection of the right to bear arms, slavery, racism, the Klan, law enforcement, religion, these are all things that are developed to keep black people in their place because of the fear that we have as white people of the retaliation that's going to come from generations of slavery and exploitation. Slavery, sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, all these things are echoes of the Civil War still being fought to this day. And that's what we're seeing. And when you see one of the greatest documentaries out there that shows the Klan over time, shows how the Klan's numbers rise and fall based on social and cultural events that demonstrate when trans people, black people, gay people, other minority, other exploited vulnerable groups, anytime they get any advantage or any right or any privilege restored or protected, there's a need to strike back. Mm-hmm. The Klan, white nationalism, white people, white purity is being protected. That's why Trump got elected. It was a reaction to Obama's presidency. Then if you hear people talk about Trump, they'll say, yeah, well, you had yours for 8 years. Trump's ours. By that, they mean I'm a racist white person, or I'm just a racist person in general, whether I'm white or not. And I think I'm better than everybody else. And I think the right class of people were not in power. And now the correct class of persons in power.
And now they are. Yeah.
And now they are. So respond to me about that just before we wrap up. This is going to take some time to go through these things a lot, I think, but because it's so complicated. But this history of law enforcement, the Klan, the church, white nationalism, and the Second Amendment, hand in hand with each other. Tell me your thoughts on that, because I don't know that everybody understands that history, and they should go back and look at it.
I am still learning the history. I didn't know about the correlation between law enforcement and the Klan, and I feel like I just live in a perpetual state of disappointment recently. So I sometimes just have to take a step back and process it. But
whenever somebody tells you they don't want you to read history, that's what they're talking about. They don't want you to see. They don't want you to know about the Klan and its connection with religion and law enforcement and how that's been that way for generations. And it's still that way in many parts of the South, places I've been.
Yes, it is. And you can't, or I can't have these conversations with many people here, because as soon as you start talking about, I had mentioned Trump and Obama, like I was talking about this because you and I had talked about it a few weeks ago. And it was just like, well, no, that's impossible. It has nothing to do with voting. It has nothing to do with this. And I'm just like, I can't have any of these conversations. Nobody wants to learn and nobody cares. Like they don't want to know. Nobody wants to know.
I think they do. And let me tell you why I think they do. I think everybody in their family has, do you have anybody in your family who is like overtly racist and you were very uncomfortable around them?
Yeah.
Like how many? I have like 5, maybe, no, like 10 actually.
I was going to say probably 5.
Yeah. And they tend to be people that are my age or older, right?
They are.
Okay. So I'm in my 50s. So what does that mean? That means that they are from a time when it was okay to talk like that, think like that, and act like that. By the way, these are also the same people who are voting in people like Trump, and they are trying to create an illusion of white prosperity and good old days that didn't exist. The good old days, the further back you go, the good old days means women didn't have the right to vote, that women are not in the workplace, that Mexicans are working at slave labors, and black people, you can call the police on them and imprison them with impunity because they're going to eat in different places than you. You don't have to see them. So it was about separating the races, separating the classes, and separating the genders. That's the good old days. And the further back you go, the less rights those other people have, and the more rights white people have. That's what they're talking about. And to me, that's the most horrifying thing. So when you're talking to somebody in your family who is expressing these values, you're talking to somebody who lived that life, somebody who laughed and smiled while somebody was being lynched, somebody who was happy with the rights being destroyed. Sorry, go ahead.
So the 5 people that I said, absolutely, I understand that. But the people that I was having this conversation with are in their 20s.
Yeah, because those are the men, the incel men with daddy issues. They're trying to keep their dad. They want to keep that tradition, right? Isn't that the word tradition?
Yes.
And I just found the greatest definition of tradition ever. The definition of tradition is, what is it, Aurelio? It's peer pressure from dead people. Peer pressure from dead people. That's tradition.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. Peer pressure.
And it's so accurate. I thought I was the only one that got irritated when people would say, but it's tradition. That was something that didn't sit well. And like, so you just follow all the time? That's all you're doing?
Anybody who's invoking the word tradition is usually doing so because they want to take a right that you have away from you.
Makes sense.
Tradition that you don't have a voice or rights or privileges in this context. So please stop talking and being and thinking.
And there's no conversation because it's tradition. You don't talk about it. That's actually
a logical fallacy. It's called the appeal to tradition. Peer pressure from dead people.
Wow.
So that's what's going on with the younger generation is they don't have an identity now. They don't know how to be men now. These violent men, they don't have power other than the gun that they're holding in their hand. They have no real voice, no real intellect, no real ability, and no real identity. So they're searching for something in their past, something in their lineage, anything that will tell them who they are, because their fathers failed so miserably to teach them how to be an individual, how to be a good human being. So they got profound daddy issues,
Absolutely.
profound cultural issues, and
And
they have no real power.
And a lot of those people I was referring to, they were also female. So they had some serious issues on their own as well.
Well, that's a whole other thing, because when you have females that are so attracted to that culture, that's about power too, but it's also about aligning yourself with the bigger bully.
Mm-hmm.
You want to align yourself with the bigger bully, either for a financial advantage or just for not being hurt, you know?
Makes sense.
It's only going to get more complicated. What I would encourage everyone to do who's listening is to pay attention to the January 6th hearings that are going on right now in the United States, because that tells you that the interviews they're doing with the lunatic Trump supporters who are on the ground, who believe Trump was speaking directly to them to take up arms and go into the Capitol and kill everybody. They were on a rape rally. They were going into to kill the police, so they weren't back in the blue. That's the first thing. Kill all the police officers. They were going in to find members of Congress, AOC and Nancy Pelosi. Those are the names they were bringing, but they also wanted to hang Mike Pence. This was an attempted coup with a bunch of rapes, attempted rape and attempted lynching thrown in. And this all came from people who believe in Jesus, the Second Amendment, and Trump as the face of the USA. This is not unrelated, because they believed when they went that law enforcement would be on their side, because they believed that law enforcement would reach into its racist roots and protect them in their racism and protect them in their lunatic beliefs in the fact that they were getting direct messages from Trump. The problem is Trump was speaking in general, but every single person who showed up, they thought, he's talking to me. I have a special relationship there. Oh man, it is disturbing how just mentally unstable so many of these people are. The Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, they're paramilitary organizations bent on the overthrow of the government. They're religious. It comes from religion, comes from Klan, comes from basically disenfranchised law enforcement and military. That's who those guys are. And the incel, they're the extreme incels. You hear them talking, you can just tell, oh my God, they're just like flopping around, not knowing what they're doing. But that's right. The followers are just a bunch of mentally unstable people who will do whatever Trump tells them to do, or functionally illiterate. And this is the red flag. If you're being told by somebody not to read certain books or go or talk about certain ideas, or that you always have to accept certain things without question, then you're dealing with an authoritarian. That's why they do not want you to read. They don't want you to know the racist and misogynistic history of this nation. Now, I'm not saying we're all evil. I'm saying that we have a history that we're refusing to contend with. The Germans have it right. They put monuments up to explaining the terrors of the Holocaust. They teach it in school. They teach their failures so that they don't repeat them. We in the United States hide our failures so that we can ensure to keep making money off of them. That's the problem. Respond to me about that. I want to give you the last word on this, because I think it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating to me. I want people to watch that January 6th hearing to see the mentality of the people who were there to kill people and rape them and hang them. That was very, very messed up. Respond to that, if you will.
I've lost all my words. There's just so many things that are disturbing in this conversation. And it's just all tied up into a very personal situation that I'm going through with my own kid. Right. So there's just so much to unpack, and so much I want to do and want to bring into the school system. And I want to teach, and I want to be there. I want to be a voice. And then there's all of these blocks because of history that they don't want us to know, and they want to keep repeating it. And also, I'm a little frightened, because if you actually start paying attention, not you, in general, the general population, if you just for a second step outside of your own little bubble and look around, look at the laws that are being passed, while there's a lot of things that are drawing your attention over here, everything it's here. It's coming back. Laws are being overturned. Things are happening. We are in the middle of it right now, and nobody has any idea.
Well, let me say this to our viewing public. If you're interested, like I said, watch the damn testimony from all the different people on both sides of the issue in January 6th, from both sides of the insurrection, right? It will be enlightening about the relation between white supremacy, Second Amendment, incel movements, and law enforcement and and the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, just these relationships and how much they're connected, and the incel movement. The next thing is, if you want to learn more about racism in the United States and the fight against it, the fight for civil rights and what it meant, it's a difficult thing to latch onto and to figure out if you're just coming at it for the first time. Here's a gateway. This is the name. The name of the woman is Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer was a very amazing civil rights activist who was raised who was raised by a sharecropper. She was a black woman raised on a sharecropping farm, where sharecropping is essentially this: slavery got made illegal. The slaves had nowhere to go and no jobs. So the people who owned the plantation said, yeah, you can stay here and I'll just charge you rent and you can buy things from my store. Charge them exorbitant prices, paid them slave wages. And so sharecroppers became the new slavery. All right. That's basically what it is. And that lasted until the 70s. This was not something that's even all the way gone, as far as I can tell. In Georgia, they still, that Operation Bloomin' Onion they just did with the Guatemalan immigrants, something like 12 different people involved in different farms all over Georgia this year being arrested for that. This is not something that's gone away. But Fannie Lou Hamer, she fought against that, and she got arrested. She got beaten and tortured by the police, beaten and tortured by other people, by the actual prisoners. They forced them to do it so that the police could say, well, we didn't do it. We had the other black people that were in prison do it. Fannie Lou Hamer, when she was being operated on for one thing, because she had a medical condition, they actually did a hysterectomy to her. They actually, they sterilized her. The violence that is committed against the black community and black activists in particular, either they arrest them and beat them, or they just simply kill them. That is the Klan. That is law enforcement. The people in law enforcement who have done those things are still in law enforcement now. This is not some remote thing. They are there as the traditional representative of their fathers and grandfathers. All right. Fannie Lou Hamer, go look her up. Watch some of just go look her up on YouTube. Watch her journey. If you can listen to that and not be outraged, I'll be shocked. But more importantly, listen to that and understand that the journey of activists in the United States to bring a peaceful resolution to the issue of racism and exploitation has been amazing. It's amazing that they're not more violent. It's amazing that they have not attacked us, white people, in a way that's it's amazing the restraint they show. So whenever I hear white people, oh, they're gathering in the street or they're being violent. No, they're not. No, they're not. You know how you know? Your house has not been burned down. Yeah. They might have. There have been some fires and there have been some bricks, but the activists are the ones who are being killed, not the police. The activists are the ones who are being illegally jailed and beaten, not the police. And when the activists, like for example in Oregon, when activists show up there, the police collude with white nationalists to put them as snipers on the rooftops. The police work with white nationalist groups with essentially the modern day Klan to do this. Just look it up. None of this stuff is hidden. But Fannie Lou Hamer is a great way to start this investigation into the civil rights movement and why possibly it might be that our parents and grandparents are ashamed of that history and don't want us to know it. Mm-hmm. Do you ever, I have always found a blockade when I talk with my parents about their parents. They just get mad. They don't want to talk about it. They get embarrassed. It's very difficult for them. Do you have that same experience? I know you have a different context than I do, for a different family structure and context than I do, but I'm just wondering.
When it comes to stuff like this, I would say no. My mom and dad it was not like that with them, due to like my sister. My sister is mixed, so yeah. We had a different context in our family unit, right? So it was a lot more open and the conversations were had. But if you were to go outside of my immediate family and get into elders outside of the home, yeah, I would see the hesitance to have any conversations and just be shut down. A lot of defensiveness came up.
I'll leave everyone with this nugget. The analogy I'll make is like the Mormon church. Up until the 70s, all Mormons were taught and practiced incest as a part of their religion. The elders especially, that they believed that God came down and had sex with his daughters, and that's how they got pregnant and that kind of stuff. And so they themselves were going to become a living God when they died. And that's the thing. Now, if you are talking to a modern day Mormon, they have no idea of this historical context. All the elders know it. Many of the elders still practice it, but they don't teach it to the younger generation because for what they call political reasons. But it's all documented. The people who have been racist, misogynistic, or terrible people who have been exploiting others, they never had a problem hiding it in the United States. It's all accounted for in speeches and the papers and the writings. The reason for the Civil War is not a mystery. It was all over slavery. Every single time one of the states seceded from the Union, they made it clear it was about slavery and retaining their slaves. What we don't want is people reading that history to know how terrible we were, to know the terrible origins of where we come from, because we don't want to reconcile with it. We want to pretend that we've created a fiction about our history that we like, that creates an identity of exceptionalism. And we need to let that go, because we're all human beings. We're all imperfect. We need to let that go and teach people what really happened so that we don't continue to make the same mistakes. And that's true in school shootings. It's true for white nationalism. It's true for the incels who have the completely wrong idea because they're living in a total fantasy world. And it's true for the police who have not been completely cleaned out of their racism or their ties to the Klan. So there you go. All right. Any thoughts before we go? I'll let you have the last word. I apologize for stealing it again.
You always steal it.
Yeah. I get excited.
Okay. You're a white man.
Oh, accurate. I'm accurately a white person. but I'm trying to learn.
Yes. We all hear you're trying.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the words of one of my managers back in the day when I was in college. He said, Turvey, losers always whine about trying.
Yeah, right? You're always trying.
Always whine about trying. I
Just
am trying.
Be better. Okay.
I will try. Don't just be flopping around with all the stuff I'm doing. Just try to
Don't do that.
What? I feel terrible. I feel terrible about that. Thank you so much to everybody who paid attention. If anybody has any questions about this stuff or needs any links, we're going to put some links to Fannie Hammer. Aurelio's playing me out. Thank you so much, Melanie. Always a pleasure. We're going to continue this conversation as it evolves. Everyone, take it easy.